Before I begin this talk, I would like to thank Dr. Venus Chen Wing-man of Hong Kong Metropolitan University for inviting me to share with you my thoughts on the future of translation technology. Translation technology has been fast changing in recent years. So fast that 5 years after the publication of my book, The Future of Translation Technology, Towards a World Without Babel, I find it necessary to revisit my pet themes by re-examining some of the major issues in translation technology. In my book, I mentioned 10 major trends that will emerge in the world of translation in the years to come. The trend, firstly, is the trend of globalization. Second, the trend of multimodal translation. And then thirdly, translation will become more and more technological. And fourthly, the teaching of translation technology will be visual and self-taught. And then more technologies will be needed in our profession. And translation concepts will be more data-based. The reason I raise this point is that most translation concepts are initiated without substantiation. That is why I think it's necessary to promote the concept of database translation theorists. And the seventh point that I made was that translation will be increasingly entrepreneurial. That is, we are not training professionals. We are also training translation businessmen. And then the eighth point that I made is that translation will be widely used in practical translation, but not in literary translation. And then I also make the point that research on translation will be technology oriented, not just sort of based on other translation research methods. And translation technology is proactive. Proactive in the sense that we are working on the future rather than looking back at the past. That is what we mean by proactivity in translation, in the field of translation technology. Now, these trends, I believe, are largely still valid and evident. Then why should we revisit the future of translation technology? For three reasons. Firstly, my book was published was actually prepared in 2012, and now it's 10 years old. So we'll look at the new developments within the last decade. And secondly, we try to realize, what should I say? The future, the new developments can be seen in the publication of the second edition of the Rowledge Encyclopedia of Translation Technology, which has 45 chapters, including a chapter by Dr. Chen, due out in April. Now, this is the cover of the book given by the publisher. So the second reason I want to look at, to revisit the theme of translation technology, is that there are new areas of development which haven't been covered in my book. And thirdly, I want to look at, take a fresh look at translation technology from global as well as area-specific perspectives. I have therefore prepared 30 or 31 tendencies and suggestions in my presentation. Before I propose the 31 suggestions, we want to discuss briefly what do we mean by translation technology. Now, in recent years, we all talk about translation technology, transtech, or techno-translation alternatively. The term has been on the lips of virtually all translators and interpreters, but most people do not seem to have a clear idea of the name and nature of translation technology, or alternatively, what translation technology is all about. I think we need to discuss a little bit on the definition of translation technology. My understanding is that translation technology is about the use and development of tools and systems in translating and interpreting. So that is briefly what we mean by translation technology. What is it? What are the contents of translation technology? Currently, it covers 4 areas: machine translation, computer-aided translation, localization, and speech translation. But more could be covered in the future, such as image translation, virtual translation, multimodal translation, camera translation, and what have you. So this is the scope of translation technology as we understand it today. But what is the purposes of studying or having translation technology? Ultimately, translation technology, or the basic nature of translation technology, is to replace human translators and human interpreters. But before it can do so, it serves as an aid to human translation and human interpreting. Before we revisit the future of translation technology, we have to bear in mind that I do not have a crystal ball to predict what is to come. I simply look at the tendencies or probabilities to make my suggestions for future exploration. We'll look at translation technology from global and area-specific perspectives. Let me see. There's one. Okay. Now, expansion of the foreign form of translation technology. After 7 decades of development, much discussion among scholars and experts, translation technology is now generally accepted as an umbrella concept, and concept which covers the use and development of tools and systems in translating and interpreting. Now, under this umbrella concept, we have four areas, as shown in this, should we say, diagram. We have got tools, general tools as we use in our daily work, work processes, grammar checkers, electronic resources, the internet, and all these what we call general tools. And then there are specific tools for translators, interpreters, such as data capturing tools, corpus analysis tools, concordances, TM systems, translation checkers. These are specific tools for translators and interpreters. When it comes to systems, we have got 4 types of systems: MT systems, CAT systems, localization systems, and speech translation systems. Machine translation are generally of 2 categories. One is the general applications category, and the second one is domain-specific category. And then for CAT, we have got CAT and HACT. And then for localization, we have got systems for software localization and those for web page localization. For speech translation, we've got 2-person conversation speech systems and multi-person conference speech translation systems. For MT and CAT, they also have what we call hybrid systems, computer-aided CAT plus machine translation, or machine translation plus translation memory. This is these are the tools and systems under the category of translation technology. So we come to our suggestions and tendencies. The first suggestions we make is that multimedia translation will be emphasized in the future. I think what we need to pay attention to will be the needs of the less fortunate, so that we can create a fairer world for these people. So it's very important that we develop care technology for those less privileged. So for instance, there are efforts to create what we call sign language translation systems to meet the needs of the audially handicapped people. We have got also systems such as computer graphics and eyeball tracking for the paralinguistic translation systems. So these are what we call multimedia translation, which will be emphasized in the near future. For instance, at Boston University, we have got the computer deciphering of sign language. We also have systems for gesture recognition by the computer. So this is the first suggestion or tendency. The second tendency is that it's feasible for us to introduce what we call integrated systems. That is, we put together different types of systems in a single platform. Because what is problematic with CAT plus MT is that we are using varied type of sources of data so that such that the quality of translation will be lowered. Now, in the future, we think that with the use of the same data, an integrated system would be very useful. So there are two major advantages in having such a system. First is user friendliness, because you can use any form of translation system at one go, actually. And then there is data consistency in the use of systems. This is how we could work out such an integrated system, meaning that we are using the same data for processing, but you can choose to use the data for machine translation, computer-aided translation, localization, or speech translation systems. This is the second suggestion I would propose for the future of translation technology. Because in this way, we're dealing with the issue of inconsistency in data usage. And this integrated system uses the same data for text generation for different forms of translation technology. This is why we propose this suggestion. And another suggestion is that we are going to reshuffle the functions of different types of systems of translation technology, because at present, there is a clear division of function among the four types of translation technology, meaning that machine translation is mainly information translation for general users. CAT is textual translation for professional translators. Localization is software and web page translation for product globalization. And speech translation is mainly for tourists or for daily conversations. But in the future, this is how we categorize the four types of translation technology according to their features and target users. Okay, machine translation is for textual translation, fully automatic, at high speed, and then bilingual, multilingual, and mainly for information translation. They are to be used for general users. Computer-aided translation is for professional translators, for textual translation, interactive, and bilingual and multilingual translation. Localization is for software localization, web page localization for the purpose of product globalization. These are mainly used by localizers. And then speech translation is for conversation and a specific language pair. These systems are for tourist and business negotiations. But in future, there might be shifting of function among the four types of translation technology. For instance, currently, machine translation is for the production of draft translations for professional translations, but it's not mainly other than its current function of providing information translation. And then for CAT, it will move from CAT to HAT until to automated computer-aided translation. Then it will replace machine translation. This is the third suggestion. Speech translation, I believe, will prevail in the future over text translation, because I think speech translation is the most popular tool of communication. And then with the creation or the production of interpreting technologies, I think more needs of the users will be met in the future. And therefore, area-specific perspective will look at each specific area. First, machine translation. We all know that machine translation have the advantages of fully automatically producing the texts. High speed, 5,000 words per second. It could be multilingual, and it is interlingual translation. But there are disadvantages of machine translation. Firstly, the quality is in general unsatisfactory. Secondly, it's very time-consuming and labor-intensive to post-edit the output, the machine translation output. And thirdly, human intervention of the systems, empty systems, is impossible. They are all closed systems. So our suggestion is that machine translation, rather than working on full text translation, could be used for the production of gist translation and abstracting, because I think it's not always necessary to produce full translation with the use of empty systems. I think empty systems are good for producing gist translation as well as abstracting the texts of abstracting the source text. This is another suggestion or observation that I make. Another suggestion is that rather than concentrating making all our efforts on interlingual translation, that is between a major language with another major language, perhaps we can use machine translation for the development of intralingual translation, meaning that we can use machine translation for Shanghainese, Cantonese text translation, or preferably for interpreting system. And Tibetan Putonghua, for instance, could be intralingual translation. So in the development of my system, TransRecipe, which is a fully automatic Chinese English translation system for cookbooks, this is an open system that I designed, because I can write new rules into the system to generate sentences according to my instructions, or rather my wishes. So new rules can be written for the generation of new sentences. For instance, this is the TransRecipe system. We have got a rule database in which you can put in some new rules so that a new sentence can be translated according to the word order you made in the rule database. The eighth suggestions that I would make is that we should use a better approach for a better output. This is the case with, we'll look at the 6 major approaches in MT to substantiate my statement. Here, it is shown that machine translation has adopted a number of approaches for machine text generation. It goes from direct MT to interlingual MT, knowledge-based MT, transfer-based MT, rule-based MT, example-based MT, statistical MT, until in 2013, we have the Neuro MT adopted by major online translation providers. Direct MT could be divided into direct matching and direct mapping. What is most problematic is that the most frequently used meaning may not be the contextual or optimal meaning. So this direct MT was not usable in a sense. Knowledge MT has something to do with neural MT that we are commonly known today. In the 70s and 80s, KBMT was using what we call common knowledge and specialized knowledge to generate for text generation. But common knowledge and specific knowledge are not that common or that specialized. So it's rather a very problematic approach. Another approach is known as example-based approach, using the principle of analogies, and is useful in some ways, but not so in other ways. So it wasn't that useful. So when you have an input text, it goes through the intralingual matching engine. We have the source text example. Using the source example to match a stored example, we have the translation. This is how we get example-based output. Okay. Another approach that is used in machine translation is known as rule-based MT, machine translation. This is mainly about word reordering to produce exact translations of the original. But rule writing is time-consuming, labor-intensive, very costly, and language-dependent, not generalizable to other languages. In other words, if you have another language pair, you have to produce another set of rules, and again, time is spent on a lot of things to produce another set for another language pair. Statistical translation was the most important approach adopted in the 1990s until I think until 2021. Most machine translation systems used the statistical approach. Eventually, or currently, it is now replaced by neural machine translation. But the major issue concerned is that translation is not about statistics, not about probability. It's about exactness in a certain context. So what is statistically probable may not be contextually accurate. That is how I would put it, all right? Now, the latest trend that we have in MT is neural machine translation. It's very complicated, but basically it's about using the existing data as the basis, and then use the attention-based and encoder decoder architecture to generate sentences or the target sentences. It is claimed that with the use of neural machine translation, the quality of translation will improve enormously. This is the graph showing the improvement with the use of the neural machine translation system. But let's take a look at the system and how it works. I will illustrate with two sentences translated by 3 neural machine translation systems, Google Translate, Microsoft Translator, and Systran, to show that there's still room for improvement in Chinese English translation for all the 3 systems. I use a sentence that he cooks two food to show that the scientist's knowledge of his papers is akin to the writer's, is a clear sign that science and art are also kindred. A work of literature is meant for all time, but its ups and downs are known already in the author's heart. So we put it to Google Translate. This is the translation. 他引用杜甫來說明科學家對他的論文了解，而作家的相似，這清楚地表示科學與藝術也是相似的。一部文學作品是有史以來的，但它的起步是眾所周知的，已經在作者心中了。Well, let me analyze the three translations. 相似的 kindred is wrong. 一部文學作品是有史以來的，它是起步眾所周知的，在這心中起。This is not what we call source equivalent translation. The second translation is empty. Do is not translated. Clear sign. 它的起步是眾所周知，已經在濕者的心臟 and so on. And the Sichuan translator, 他引述杜甫表示，他的資料科學家的知識，作者的是如何同時一個清楚的標誌，科學和藝術也親屬。文學工作意味着所有時刻，但他的性須作者的心臟已經知道。This is again not equivalent translation. Actually, my translation is 他引用杜甫詩句文章千古時，得失寸心知，來說明科學家對自己論文之所知，與文學家對其作品之所知如同一轍，清楚顯示出科學與藝術性質上並無異詞。Now, this is how I translated the sentence. But when you look at the three translations by the three popular Google Translate by the neural machine translation system, we know that there's room for improvement. All right. Again, we use the free system for translate a very simple title of an article about Zhongnamshan. Okay. So the title of that article is 想方設法為病人看好病. This is so the Google Translate trying to find a good patient for the patient. Professor the White Soldier. For Microsoft, is finding the ways to keep a patient optimistic. Professor Bai Zhongnamshan. For Sichuan, does everything possible to favor the sickness for the patient. White-coated warrior, Professor Zhongnamshan. We are not totally satisfied with the translations produced by the free systems. So my translation is striving my best to cure patients. Professor Zhongnamshan, a warrior in white. Okay, so you understand that neural machine translation is far from satisfactory in the generation of translations. There's still much to be improved on. Okay, so it is evident that there is still much room for improvement for neural machine translation, especially in the case of Chinese English translation. All right. The ninth suggestion that I made is that we need to have a better approach. A better approach is needed for a better output. We understand that the machine translation is still imperfect in certain areas. Firstly, it's about polysemy. It is meaning that there are a number of meanings for a single word or expression. The shift of a part of speech, syntactical ambiguity, context, proper noun translation, abbreviation translation, tense translation, long sentence translation, source equivalent translation, language kinship. Now, these are the issues difficult to be dealt with by machine translation. So it is very important that we need to have an approach that could deal with the above issue adequately. Okay. The 10th suggestion I would like to make is that we need to have more domain-specific systems. What we are using online are what we call general application systems, which cannot produce domain-specific text very successfully. Alternatively, if you use a domain-specific system to translate a general text, the results are more or less the same. That is poor translation. So my suggestion is that we would try to produce as many what we call popular domain systems possible, so that we can put together these systems as general application systems to translate general and domain-specific texts. For instance, we can develop systems for business, finance, sport, law, entertainment. These are common or popular domains for people. So we can, if you can produce all these systems, then the translation could be much better. All right. The 11th suggestion is that we use MT by professionals the use of MT by professional translators will become very popular. Now, in the past, machine translation was despised by translators due to its poor output. Nowadays, 56% of professional translators in Europe actually use machine translation outputs as draft translations for the production of publishable translations or acceptable translations. I think the situation in other parts of the world will be similar in the future. The 12th suggestion that I would make is that there will be rapid advances in MT, in machine translation, based on three factors. Firstly, I think AI is moving very fast, or advancing, making rapid advances. So with the advances in AI, I think translation will get better and better. Secondly, I think since all the with the huge increase in the e-resources, e-books, e-articles, and e-everything, so the big data will become bigger and bigger. So we say it this way. So with the existence of big data, I think that translation will become better. And thirdly, I think neuroscience is advancing greatly. So with the new developments in neuroscience, neuro-machine translation will be better. Okay, so this is the what I would think, why the reasons why I expect MT to get better and better in the future. And then the 13th suggestion that I would like to make is that it's always very difficult to translate long sentences by machine translation. So there should be a kind of sentence breaking device for machine translation, so that machine translation will be dealing with shorter sentences rather than long sentences, since shorter sentences are easier to be processed. Now, this is the, so that is why I think long sentences could be handled either by pre-editing, that is, you pre-edit a long sentence into shorter sentences, or you can put in what we call a sentence breaking device in the system, so that what is produced would be short sentences of originally long sentences turning into short sentences, and short sentences being translated into short sentences. All right. The 14th suggestion that I made is that mobile translation will be a major trend. Normally, we use desktop computers to produce translation, but increasingly it will be mobile. So mobile translation platforms will be the normal work, what we call translation workstations for translators. With the large number of mobile phone users, I think mobile translation will be the dominant trend. Another observation, let's see how we understand mobile translation. First, in the old days, we install systems into computers. So this is what we call install system translation, okay? And then later on, we work on the internet or intranet. This is what we call networked system. Then later on, we use the World Wide Web. This is internet system. The trend is going to be mobile system working on mobile devices, mainly mobile phones, right? Another suggestion that I would make is that this is about crowdsourcing, because in the old days as well as nowadays, we are hiring translators to do the translation work. But crowdsourcing will probably become a major trend in future. It has become increasingly popular in China to translate texts by crowdsourcing. If we can deal with issues such as quality control and project management in a satisfactory manner, the future of crowdsourcing will be promising, because there are so many people who know so many languages, so we can make use of the talent to contribute to crowdsourcing, right? And another suggestion that I would make is that image translation will gain wider acceptance. It is likely that people in the next generation, actually in the present generation, we are interested more and more in images rather than in texts. So visual translation is becoming very important. But visual translation has to be based on images. So we have to build up our image database in order to enable the translation of images through visual translation. Visual translation can be image to text or text to image, right? Camera translation is becoming very popular. This is a kind of, it can be offline or online translation. And then if you can identify the object, and the name of the object can be translated into target text, and so on and so forth. So visual data has to be increased greatly to enable visual translation. In areas specific perspective, we now move on to CAT. I think CAT has a very promising future because it's based on reusability. That is, what is translated doesn't need to be translated again. So the idea is to work on the past document to produce something for the translation of the current document, and then the data that you have stored will be useful for the translation of future documents. This is how we understand the concept of reusability. In the span of about half a century, CAT has grown from obscurity to global presence. If you look at the growth of CAT from a global perspective, you could note that USA is the leader in the development of CAT systems, followed by Japan, Germany, China, and UK. Now, these are the leaders, but there are also developers in different areas, notably in France, in Canada, in Sweden, Hungary, Poland, Belgium, just to mention a few. So, that is why we think that CAT will become prosperous in the future. There are reasons for me to believe that growth will continue, because we have now entered into the age when translation can be done without actually translating the text. That is, you can use translations produced by others to produce your own translation. Secondly, CAT facilitates team translation. In other words, what a person can do in a day can be done by a team in minutes or hours. So this is very efficient. And then with the use of CAT, you don't have a high cost, you have a high volume, and better management could be followed. At the same time, there are a number of areas for CAT for improvement. That is, you need to do a bit of translation initiation, which is very time consuming. You need to create and maintain terminology databases, TM databases. Again, this is time consuming and labor intensive. And the reuse of the stored data may be questionable, because you might be dealing with one topic, one area today, but another area tomorrow. That is why it's not that satisfactory. And the speed of text generation is much slower than that of machine translation. That is why it has room for improvement. So I think CAT is actually facing keen challenges from machine translation. And we all know that with the introduction of neural translation, machine translation is getting better and better. Now with the use of big data, artificial intelligence, the improvement could be very huge. So I think big data is certainly very important to both CAT and machine translation. But the data we use must be of high quality, relevant, and adequate. So that is why we think that user-friendly CAT systems must be introduced to attract more users. Otherwise, it could only be used by professional translators. Okay, so another tendency or suggestion that I would make is that user customization should be introduced, because all the systems that we use are sort of closed systems. It doesn't allow customization. So system customization should be of concern to us. And in the future, we hope to have what we call customizable systems for us to use. All right. So that is another suggestion. And then what I'm proposing would be what we call automated computer-aided translation system. That is, we use what we call, how should I put it? I think what we have been using are systems that are closed systems which cannot be customizable. So I propose what we call automated computer-aided translation as an alternative to emulate machine translation by its human quality translation output, because machine translation cannot produce human quality output, okay? So we will try to make computer-aided translation largely automatic. That is, we move from computer-aided translation to human-aided computer translation, and eventually to automated computer-aided translation, right? This is the main idea, because the machine translation output so far has been largely unsatisfactory. But what is satisfactory comes out from computer-aided translation. But computer-aided translation is too slow. That is why we are working trying to use CAT to speed up CAT for human quality translation. So what we are proposing would be computer-aided human translation to human-aided computer translation, and then to automated computer-aided translation. So there are several strategies in the design of such an automated computer-aided translation. Firstly, we use what we call translator manageable machine translation approaches. We rule out those systems which are not translator manageable, that is, systems which can be managed by translators. And secondly, I think it's very important to use clean data to produce automatic translation. Clean data, meaning that the data we human translators produce for the production of output. And thirdly, we have to create two types of tools to search for the terms we need and for the TMs we need. So we have to design what we call auto term search and auto TM search, all right? And thirdly, at the stage of editing, we have the reference template to close the gap between edit distance. By edit distance, it means the distance between machine translation and human translation. If we can close the gap between the edit distance, what it produce would be highly satisfactory, all right? So the idea is to moving from CAT to automatic CAT. Firstly, we use those systems which are manageable by translators, such as pattern-based, rule-based, example-based. Then we use we import the term database and import the TM database. This is stage one. By use of the translator manageable system, MT, with the use of term database and translation memory database, we could automatically generate 80% of the output. And then we come to the stage where we need to have the text generation to be automated by auto term search and auto TM search. That is, we are searching for terms specific to the project and TM database specific to the project. Okay, and when it comes to the quality assurance stage, stage 3, we use reference template to do the text editing and checking. In other words, 80% plus 15% plus 5%, it is fully automatic CAT system. All right. So when we design such a system, we are talking about 3 levels of operation and so on, and 3 types of data, as well as 3 types of operation. So this is what we call a 3L, 3D, 3T system. 3L refers to level of progression from CAT to HAT, MT to ACAT. The second stage will be 3D system. We use the quality data, relevant data, and adequate data to produce quality translation. And thirdly, we try to introduce operational simulation, syntactical manipulation, and technical innovation to realize high quality automatic computer-aided translation, right? This is how the automatic CAT works. Another suggestion that I would make is to pay more attention to what we call computer-aided interpreting. Interpreting is a much neglected area as far as technology is concerned. We understand that in Spain, there is an institute of multilingual interpreting research, which pays a great deal of attention to what we call computer-aided interpreting, because speech translation is becoming more and more important. So speech translation developers, interpreters could work together to come up with a system that could help interpreters in their work. Another perspective that we'll look at is localization. Now, localization is actually a very fast-growing and profitable area. When we talk about localization, basically, there are two types of localizations that we want to discuss. Web software localization and web page localization for the consumption of the local audience. The main purpose of localization is to maximize the understandability and usability of a product so that it can be used in different parts of the world with optimal effectiveness. So another tendency about localization that is observable is that localization business will be prosperous because take the example of video games localization is becoming very important and very profitable. That is why localization is what I would say the future of localization is promising. Now, another task, another suggestion that I would like to make is that from our experience, internationalization stage of localization is very complicated. It requires the translator to have certain knowledge about computing, about computing Python or what have you, so that this part can be dealt with by the localizer. So I hope that the localization system could be made simpler for translators so that all that needs to be done can be done by them without relying on others. You know that when you have localization, that you need to build a localization team in which you have got several personnel taking care of different parts of the project. So I hope that this will not be the case in the future. Another suggestion for the future is that, not suggestion actually, is the Chinese certainly will be the #1 localization stage in the world. When we look at the languages to be localized, we understand that in the past we were working on dominant languages, that is languages of the more advanced, industrially more advanced country, such as French and German, Italian, or what have you. Later on, localizers worked on major languages, English or other languages. And nowadays, they work on strategic languages with the new potential markets. We realize more recently, Chinese language is the #1 localization language in the world. So it will be so in many years to come. Okay, and another suggestion is that rather than having full localization executed by localizers, I think it's about time that we work on partial localization rather than full localization. Right? And localization is always taken to be a kind of operational procedure in the translation industry. Very few scholars work on topics on localization. I think it's about time that we look at the theoretical aspect of localization and then work on it as an academic area. This is another suggestion that I would make. Right? Lastly, we come to the area of speech translation. Speech translation, the history of speech translation is relatively short when compared to machine translation and computer-aided translation, but it's becoming increasingly popular because there are many tourists and much need. There's much need for conversational conversations discourse translation. That is why a related suggestion is that we have to pay great attention to speech translation. We think that speech translation will become very important. And the number of users has been on the increase for many years. For instance, the e-speech of Google Translate has more than 500 million users, right? And the number will continue to grow as tourism has prospered rapidly, right? Another suggestion is that the number of speech translation should be increased enormously. When you look at the total number of languages in the world, we have 7,110 languages. The number of languages that machine translation can process, we have got around 150, or should we say over 100 languages. But when it comes to speech translation, the number of languages is around 40, so it's relatively small. And then the voice data is actually monopolized by some companies because you get the data from the media, say a mobile phone or whatever. So this would be the monopoly of some companies. Another concern is the infringement of privacy in data collection. So the number of languages processed by speech translation is still relatively small for many reasons. As we suggest before, I think intralingual systems should be developed for machine translation. And then by the same token, I think intralingual systems should be developed for speech translation. Again, say Shanghainese and Cantonese, or Chaozhou and Cantonese, whatever, all right? This is the 30th suggestion. And then for all the systems that we have discussed so far, machine translation, speech translation, localization, I would opt for an open system to be designed and developed, because without an open system, I think translators would feel very disappointed because they have no role to play in the development and of a certain system that they use in their daily life, all right? So this is my last suggestion. My conclusion is that the 31 tendencies and suggestions that have been made with the intention of making translation technology more user-friendly and matching the user's expectation in the future. So my conclusion is that the future of translation lies with technology, and translation technology is and will always be our future. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's the end of my presentation.
There is Professor Chen. She's going to ask a question.
Chen, yes.
Thank you, Professor Chen. I have listened to your lecture from the first minute to the end. And I have one question after listening to your talk. Do you think, well, do you have any suggestions for teachers at the university level how to improve his or her CAT proficiency? Thank you.
That is a very difficult question for me. I haven't been teaching for a number of years, but I think teaching, as I've just mentioned before, nowadays is purely visual. That is, you can't sort of just let them read the textbook and then tell them how to do. Because in our laboratory, we have got a huge intelligent whiteboard for teaching CAT and machine translation, because I think it's very important to show them step by step how to use a system, what are the tricks and traps that we have to note in the process of teaching. And secondly, I think there are what we call tutorials, video tutorials for us to use in teaching technology courses. So that is how I would suggest in the teaching of CAT or MT, or for that reason, localization and speech translation. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.